Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We're about to begin. I'm going to call Father Karam to lead us in prayer. And then I will go through the agenda and the rules. And then we'll have Mr. Charles speak for 5 minutes, and then the panel will start. I will give you those details after. So without spending any more time on introductions, let us call Father Karam to lead us in prayer.
Let us listen to a text of Holy Scripture from the first book of Kings, chapter 3. The king went to Gibeon to sacrifice there, since that was the principal high place. Solomon presented 1,000 burnt offerings on the altar at Gibeon. There Solomon replied and spoke to God. You showed most faithful love to your servant David, my father, when he lived his life before you, in faithfulness and uprightness and integrity of heart. You have continued this most faithful love to him by allowing a son of his to sit on his throne today. You have made your servant king in succession to David, my father. But I am a young man, unskilled in leadership. And here is your servant surrounded by your people whom you have chosen, a people so numerous that its number cannot be counted or reckoned. So give to your servant a heart to understand how to govern your people, how to discern between good and evil. For how could one otherwise govern such a great people as yours? It pleased God that Solomon should have asked for this. Since you have asked for this, God said, and not asked for long life for yourself or riches or for the lives of your enemies, but have asked for a heart wise and shrewd. Here and now I do what you ask, and I give you a heart that is wise, as no one has had before, and no one will have after you. And I shall give you, in addition, long life, if you follow my ways, keeping my laws and commandments, as your father David followed them. Let us pray. Good and gracious God, fill us with your wisdom from on high. Give us listening hearts to discern your will for ourselves and for the good of our nation. Send forth your Spirit, that we may have understanding and knowledge for the upliftment and the benefit of all your people here in Dominica. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
So good night once again. Tonight we gathered here for a discussion among the political parties on electoral reform, specifically zooming on the topic using the ID card identification during the ID card verification process as a means of sanitizing the voters list. We invited on about the 7th of May the three political parties to participate: the Dominica Labour Party, the Dominica Freedom Party, and the United Workers' Party. We have with us the United Workers' Party and the Dominica Freedom Party. We haven't had an excuse or reason why the Dominica Freedom Party, the Dominica Labour Party is not here. I am hoping that there is something pretty serious why they cannot be here. I have not been able to get them on by the phone. So let us give them the benefit of the doubt and that they would have wished to let the public hear their views on this topic. Tonight, we're going to have a very short presentation by Mr. John W. Charles, about 5 slides. And after that, we're going to have the panel discussion. The panel discussion is going to be moderated by Father Karam. He's in charge. The rules are very simple. Each political party originally was given 20 minutes to talk among 2 speakers. With only 2 of them turning out, they have been given 25 minutes. They will decide among themselves which speaker speaks for 5 or 10 or 15 minutes and who will speak for the balance. The first party to go on, they have agreed among themselves. The Freedom Party will go first, and then the UWP, and then Freedom, then UWP. All the presentations will flow one into the other, and after that, the floor will be open for questions. Now, there are rules for the question. The questions should not be more than 1 minute. The moderator has the right to cut you off. The response should not be more than 3 minutes. The parties are aware of the rules. The response can be from the panel, or if the question is directed to Electoral Reform Group, one of us may answer. Only one one clarification follow-up question is allowed, and it should not be for more than 1 minute, and the response should not be more than 3 minutes. Any questions or concerns or comments the panel has should be directed through the moderator, not directly at others or anybody else. Beyond that, the moderator is allowed to use his discretion. And that's the simple rules. It's a public discussion. I urge you to listen attentively and to participate. So without further ado, I'll call Mr. Charles to give us a short presentation.
Good evening, everybody, and good evening to the listeners of this program. The chairman of our exercise has asked me and has introduced me, John W. Charles, to make a short presentation. It is more or less to focus on exactly what we have been involved in and what we are doing. We are basically business-oriented individuals, church, and trade unions. And the thing we do best is manage. And therefore, our focus has been on management. And we are concerned about the climate in which business is done. So we have our own interests in terms of economic interests. And I think part of the speech of the Bishop of Roseau in the new address clearly reflect concern, the social concern and the well-being. And therefore, we were motivated by this. And some of the concerns we have was based on electoral reform. And from our own exercise, we highlighted the fact that this is something that's very complex, and we should go in deep exercise and education to deal with it. In our exercise, we were fortified by the fact, or we were confirmed by the fact, that our current laws can at least provide a basis for dialogue among the parties and provide a basis where the people of Dominica can have confidence in the system. We have been first in the Caribbean in a number of things. I can mention 2 of them. We are the first woman prime minister, and we're the first country to move into independence and move away from the monarchical system and have a republic and have a president. We're the first, before Trinidad, before Guyana, and the others. So they're first, and we can pride ourselves in creating institutions. So therefore, we believe we have good people, educated people, and who can do the things. In our exercise, we realize that there are a number of things that can be done in cleaning the list, or having an up-to-date and current register of electors. It is an administrative function. And the fact that we had had previous elections and given quote statements about them does not prevent us from updating our list, because as a result of time, a number of things happen. People die, people change their name, people move away from the country, etc. They can change their addresses. And we need to have accurate information to make proper decision making. It is just a nature of the activity. And therefore, in simple language, the list for 1980 election was not good for the 1990 elections, the 1985 elections. Similarly, the list for the 2014 election is not good for the upcoming general election. We have to have it updated and correct, even because of registration of new electors. And therefore, we look at the laws and we realize what the legislation says. And we believe that we could provide a platform through which the parties can get involved in wonderful and nice relationship. It is something I encourage. This is not the first time I've published opinion. In 2013, when we had the problem with the resignation of our president, I got involved and I issued an opinion. It was used by both parties, all three parties, to their own benefit. But I got involved because I believe in my constitution. I believe in the offices that have been created, and they should have respect for each other. And my language was, you can sit and talk over bakes and cakes and juice. So we have these ways you can clean the list. And we choose the one that we believe it would not be controversial, removing dead persons. Simple as that. And we look at the law that provides for the removal of dead persons, and we have a section in the Act that mandates the Registry of Deaths and Births to send information to the Chief Registration Officer. And through my own training and experience, I consider this provision as a notification provision. Unfortunately, there was agreement with me. At the last discussion at the parish hall, the chairman indicated it's notification. You do not need an objection there. So we can go on that. But I went further and I indicated that the Office of the Registrar on Deaths and Births is not the only credible source of information, in the sense that it is restricted only to deaths in Dominica. There are a lot of persons who are moving, who are electors, and they die overseas. Our own experiences, and I know a number of them from my constituency who have died. I know that. And they have returned with death certificates, whether it is from Guadeloupe, the United States, different countries. So we know that. Then I went further and said we are living in the age of information, communication, and technology that makes it easy for management to use these tools to collect information, and they will provide for speed, accuracy, and we can minimize double registration. ETC specialist. I'm a lawyer, full stop. I have all the experiences in science, yes, and education, but I focus on my law right now. And we're saying that having regard to the fact that both of these offices, the Office of the Chief Registration Officer is computerized, and the Office of the Registrar of Deaths and Births is computerized, it is quite easy to generate the information to clean it. And if the appropriate amendment is made to the regulation, not the act, permitting relatives and personal representatives of deceased electors to provide appropriate information about their death, the task becomes very easy. It can be done within 4 months to 6 months. And I was heartened when the announcement, and I hope I heard it correctly, that the attempt or the intention to go overseas is given up. My personal position as a lawyer and a person involved in law reform is that the process itself is inherently flawed. Inherently flawed. And I'll give you a simple example. If you can go back to this slide that talks about how you can remove names. Yes, let's go back to that. Let's go back to it. No, the other one. Yes. And you look at C. We use different language. In this section 7, it talks about has been absent from Dominica for a period exceeding 5 years. The other formulation, he has departed from Dominica. There is nothing in the law saying you have returned to Dominica or you have visited Dominica. That formulation and that test is a completely different test to what's in the law. And I'll give it to you by example. I can decide to go away from Dominica for 4 years and not return within that period. I have not traveled to Dominica. It is an exceptionally difficult task to ask me to prove if I have traveled to Dominica within the last 5 years. That is not the test. The test is you have to be absent from Dominica for a period exceeding 5 years. I just want you to know that it's important to me. I deal with words in legislation, and these tests are different. I thank you, and I hope the panelists can focus on this aspect.
Okay, so before I call Father Karam to moderate this panel discussion, I want to do one last housekeeping. We have a timer at the back. Would you stand up, Miss Sandy? This lady, I want the panel to note that she will stand up when you have 5 minutes left. We assume your first speaker is going for 10 minutes. First speaker goes for 10 minutes and last speaker goes for 15 minutes. So she'll stand up when you have 5 minutes left. She'll wave her hand when you have 3 minutes left. And then she will clap when the time is up. Let us respect that. I want to introduce Father Karam again, so let him take charge.
Thank you very much. So my task here is very simple, and it's to keep an orderly flow of the panel discussion tonight. And I just want to share with you 3 words that I think are extremely important for discussion and dialogue. Mr. John Ilyu Charles provided a legal framework for all what we're going to talk about. I want to give us a different kind of framework, more on the ethical side. The first word is respect. To respect each and every speaker and each and every individual. Over the course of this discussion and debate, sometimes we hear things that are unpleasant, name-calling, summarily dismissing each other. I think we need to keep that word in mind as we continue to discuss an important topic like this. The other word is consensus. As a maturing nation and people, we need to learn to build consensus among ourselves. It's not only the most powerful that has to gain all its advantages, but everybody is deserving of a hearing. And in hearing both the majority and the minority, I think we come to a broader sense of what is right, what is good, what is true, what is noble. So building consensus is terribly, terribly important as we mature as a nation. And the trust is the final word. We have to be able to trust each other. I think if we're going to have any discussion and if we're going to listen and have openness in listening to the views of each other, we have to be able to trust. Trust our government, trust our opposition, trust those in the minority opposition, trust those who are seeking the good of our country. And I think keeping those three words in mind will not only should not only govern how we discuss tonight, but how we discuss and relate in the wider community. So respect, consensus, and trust. Let me call on the first speaker, the first panelist, who will be Mr. Boston from the Dominica Freedom Party, and he will present for 10 minutes. Mr. Boston.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator, Leader of the Opposition, Senator Ronald Charles, Leader of the Dominica Freedom Party, Ken Vital, and good evening to you in the audience. It's so nice to be here tonight because this discussion belongs to us. We are all equal in this discussion. We're talking about electoral reform. The Freedom Party, the Labour Party, the UWP, and the voters are equal in this discussion. So no one should feel that they have a monopoly on this discussion. And it is nice when people can sit and discuss what affects them, what affects our country, and how we can resolve those issues. Electoral reform has been around for a long time. We've been discussing electoral reform. The Freedom Party have written to the Electoral Commission on many occasions and raised concerns. We met with them on a number of occasions and discussed with them how we could better our electoral process. Now the commission is an independent commission established by law. So they should not be influenced to do the bidding of any political party or individual. They should do what is right for the people of Dominica so that our democracy can be maintained and we can enhance our democracy going forward. Because it is really heart-hurting after an election if you feel the process was unfair. If you lose a seat and you lose it fairly, you help to celebrate those who have won. If you lose a seat and you lose it unfairly, then you are very upset. And we should do our very best to avoid that. Then, after the 2009 election, when we saw what transpired in the election and how the other side took advantage of the process, the Freedom Party and the UWP together issued a white paper. We had a public discussion, press conference on it to discuss our concern. A delegation was mounted with Judith Peston at the time, leader of the Freedom Party, and Ron Green, at the time leader of the UWP, and others, and went to St. Kitts. There was an OECS heads of government meeting taking place, and the idea was to raise our concern to the heads while they were in St. Kitts. Some heads decided they did not want to hear, but some make time to listen. So this thing has been around for a long time. And I commend very, very strongly the Concerned Citizens Movement for the involvement. The UWP, you have heard them on this issue. The Freedom Party, you have heard us on this issue. And now the group of churches, business, and civil society. And the people of Dominica, the voters, must take full charge of these discussions and to ensure that electoral reform come to Dominica. Now, we have witnessed in other places where electoral reform have taken place, and these things we're asking for are very simple. What is the big deal of not wanting to cleanse the list? Do you see a difficulty in cleansing the list? Do you see a difficulty in issuing ID card? I was in St. Lucia assisting election there, and the people I was working for, they would call and they would give them a time when to pick up their ID cards so they can go to the polling station and present themselves on their ID card and to vote. You go to the bank to change a check, they ask you for your ID. You go other places for your ID. Why we are voting the government to run our affairs for 5 years and we don't have an ID card to show that I am the person? I can give you an example. There was a guy from Delis who voted in Maho, in Massac, and voted in Delis at the same time. And that guy was a strong freedomite voting for freedom. When Brian Allen and myself found out that he was voting in Maho and then moved to Delis to vote, so there was 2 votes for freedom, one for Brian Allen in Maho and one for Hesketh Alexander in Delis. We told him that is wrong, because if they find you doing that, you'll be punished. And we got the electoral office to remove his name. We asked him, where do you want to vote, to exercise your vote? 1 vote. Each of us have 1 vote. And he said Massac, and it was changed. So when we talk about people are voting on others' name and people have double registration, it is a fact. It is true, and so forth. And I do not see why for so long we have not gotten this reform in place. The Electoral Commission themselves recognize the need for reform. And they too wrote to the parties. We received a letter, the Freedom Party, saying that they were going to cleanse the list and they would start, I think it was the 1st of July last year. We're in May 2019 and nothing has happened. When we wrote them a letter, we responded to their letter about cleansing the list, and we told them that they have our full support and we commend them because it was necessary to do. When nothing was happening, we wrote another letter to ask them what was happening, and they said they did not get the monies allocated to them from the Ministry of Finance. Now, the government role in that is to ensure that the monies are available to the Commission to do its work, and then if there is matters to go before Parliament, to facilitate those matters. That's the role. But the Labour Party, the Freedom Party, UWP, and any other party registered, and the citizens must discuss this issue fairly and frankly. And I can tell you, we have no malice in this discussion. It is not a reform for UWP or for Freedom Party or for Labour Party. It's a reform for Dominica. And whoever in government has to live by the reform, right? I was in St. Kitts and they were having a discussion on reform. And the hall was too small. And the chairman said, next meeting we'll get a bigger place to accommodate more people. In Dominica, we have the opposite. The hall is short on the people. That cannot be right. And you can't be so of a supporter of something for it not to see wrong and right, and to put right where it's supposed to be. Okay, I'm seeing the hand is waving, so I have to give up. So the point is, we have, as a people, to take charge, to get involved, that the government will recognize that, and the Commission in particular, that electoral reform is necessary, and we as a country, as a people, we want it, and we're saying we want it, and we want it now. We want it now. What's the delay? Simple thing to get done. Thank you, and you'll hear from me later. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Boston. That was Mr. Boston from the Dominica Freedom Party. And now we'd like to invite Mr. Ronald Charles of the United Workers' Party to talk for 10 minutes, to share with us for 10 minutes. Thank you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Let me acknowledge the presence of the political leader, Mr. Lennox Linton, the leader of the Freedom Party, Mr. Vidal, and Mr. Buston, the moderator, and the warm people here this evening, of course, the media, the world by extension. Good evening to you. I was pleased when I was told that I have 10 minutes to speak, and I was wondering how am I going to put it together, but I was happy to know that Mr. John Charles did the work that I was going to do. That is to say, to kind of highlight the importance of one thing. That is, in all what he said, in a nutshell, that we have the necessary laws in place to do the necessary basic amendments that we need to do. So the draft proposals that we're hearing about is not necessary at this time because we have the necessary laws to do so. And therefore, based on that premise, one does not have to divulge in all the laws again. But I will say this, and I'm happy that Father said it. When we speak of consensus, we speak of consensus, the Dominican Labour Party, the Freedom Party, the other parties involved. We're talking about the populists. We're talking about Dominicans by extension. Consensus. The Commonwealth Observers Mission Report. The laws that we have. The report from the team, the team of Mr. Leblanc and the local persons who took part in it to put together this report. We have consensus to move forward for the two basic things. That is cleansing of the list and ID cards. We can do it, people. All right? Now, to say that any new legislation is needed to implement electoral reform is to misunderstand the intent of the framers of such laws. The present legal framework allows for adequate reform of the present system of elections. To say otherwise, we would be seriously question the integrity and the vision of those who labored in the vineyard to deliver a legal protocol which will always form the basis of any and every reform. The sort of reform which is needed at present is the proper application of the law and to address the new and crucial areas which seriously hamper the health of Dominica's process of election. The list of electors should be clean from all names which do not now legally belong on that list. We heard from Mr. John Charles, Section 17 of the law stipulates clearly, and he explained it, that the registrar has the necessary power to do certain things as it relates to that. Therefore, new registration would be a good place to begin, as this would guarantee fairness, not disenfranchisement. Benefited Dominicans would be regularized when they resume residency on the mainland. This work, better than a draft idea to inform voters away from the home front. How would this be done, and where would the Commission concentrate on? Will all countries be visited should this draft bill become law? This proposed amendment to the law is the epitome of disenfranchisement, as the state cannot guarantee these citizens who reside in Timbuktu or in Africa, and that they will indeed receive the services and benefits of the Commission's confirmation exercise. Campaign financing, fixed electoral dates, 2 terms for the PM, possible absentee voters with contribution to country's tax threshold. This work is for all. Voter education and neutrality of the system. I will therefore focus on campaign financing. Clearing the voters list has occupied center stage in the conversation about the need to protect integrity in Dominica's elections. It is a dark day in Dominica's history when those who are charged with the management and administration of the electoral process do not see a need for voter identification cards at this time, when the voters list has so many names as the number of people in Dominica. This responsibility and this demonstration of dishonesty strikes at the very heart of Dominica's existence as a true democratic and independent nation. However, there is another grave threat to Dominica's democracy, which is just as deadly as a voters list. This threat strikes at the very heart of the integrity of Dominica's electoral process. It is a threat which the Commission, aided and abetted by unknown well-meaning professionals, and I'm sure intellectuals, have no desire to change because it serves their interests. What is this threat that threatens Dominica? It is the patent or obvious lack of campaign finance reform. We in Dominica have already experienced the spiteful effects of unlimited spending in elections with no information about the source or sources of the spending. One thing is clear, however, about the alleged obscene amounts of money that the incumbents seem to have at its disposal. It is what King Dice has called Jumbie money. It is rounded money gained from dark sources and illegal activities. It is money that has been gained from questionable sources, hidden in the dark crevices of
that elections were not or were not necessarily fair. The term necessarily was used or implied simply because the observers did not have the time to fully investigate the situations they noted. If they had that time, I am certain they would have not used the words necessarily. They would have said that it was certainly not fair. These observers have all made recommendations for reforms. And then we also need to remove the perception of cheating, even if you want to think it's just a perception. Because even addressing that perception is really a sound justification for doing electoral reforms. What reforms are desired? And the Senator Charles touched on some of those. We talk about campaign finance reforms. I won't spend a lot of time because he did talk about some of those, or some of the elements of that. Fixed dates for elections, I think you also mentioned that. Term limits for the Prime Minister and maybe even other positions. I won't spend so much time on that, but there are a few others. Freedom of information. Transparency reduces the ability of elected officials to hide official information that could be important for the public to exercise fair judgment in selecting the government that they want to manage their affairs. Independence of the Electoral Commission. Better composition of the Commission to arrive at fair efforts to properly administer the electoral system is necessary. And I don't have the time to go into details, but most of you would know the composition. It really sparks against fairness. The Integrity in Public Office Commission as well. Better composition of the Commission to better implement the mandate of the Commission, which is critical for reducing corruption in public office, which also has a tie back to free and fair elections. The use of referendums needed to overcome some matters where it is best to have decisions of conscience, rather than decisions that are politically machinated. Other institutional arrangements that are for improving public decision making, and these are necessary to help overcome the short-term focus of our political system. Importantly, the requirements for voting, of course, besides being alive and sane. But we know, and the lawyers have spoken here tonight, we know that registration is currently the basis for registration under the current law. But there is need to clarify the basis for removal from the list due to absence. To my mind, and the lawyers have already spoken, but to my mind, to remove persons from the list who have not been resident in Dominica for more than 5 years is really the true spirit and intent of the law, not simply being absent from Dominica for a continuous period or going back and forth, as Eliu had suggested. So this needs to be corrected and clarified. These are some of the kinds of reforms that we need. But we also have to consider whether we need to extend the right to vote to citizens in general or to persons of interest. Interests could be based on various criteria. Residency, to my mind, should remain the foundational requirement. But if one is a citizen but is not a resident in Dominica, we ought to look at other interests, and this could include ownership of property, ownership of registered businesses that file tax returns, individuals filing tax returns, investments of a certain thresholds in investment vehicles such as venture capital fund, and so on. But why should one have an interest? But simply for the basic reason that if we elect a government to manage our affairs, or rather we elect a government to manage our affairs, that's the reason. If one has no affairs in a country, then of what benefit it is to vote? A U.S. citizen or a resident alien living or traveling outside the United States is generally required to file income tax returns, estate tax returns, and gift tax returns, and pay estimated tax in the same way as those residing in the United States. Hence, there is interest, real interest. You cannot deny the right to vote from such a person. So, let us enter into a constructive discussion on how to empower all our citizens, whether they are here or overseas. How do we empower everyone to be part of the Commonwealth? Our success as a nation will hinge to a large measure on our ability to realize a Commonwealth culture and in creating a Commonwealth of Dominica that is bigger than those of us at home. But we sure have the name Commonwealth, if you understand the meaning of Commonwealth, besides being part of the Association of Commonwealth States. It is time, to my mind, to work towards what we ought to be as a Commonwealth in practice. And as our anthem says, all for each and each for all. That is really what Commonwealth should be about. But part of the effort really should include addressing the issue of the right to vote. But the argument I have heard from the Spirit-led government concerning not disenfranchising Dominicans in terms of the right to vote is really a disingenuous or spurious one. If the existing government is serious about not disenfranchising Dominicans, they should make real effort to adjust the laws rather than to break the spirit of the existing law. For instance, going overseas to confirm persons on the voters list as it was proposed, or as is currently proposed in the amendment to the Registration of Electors Act, is offensive to the spirit of the existing law. And the existing law, as I've said, the residency is the core requirement there. What adjustments in the application of the existing law is required? Maybe perhaps along with some minor adjustments. But clearly, updating of the voters lists along with ID cards. And we wonder ask, whose responsibility it is to update the list, and that's why you have heard the lawyers say there's maybe no need for adjusting the law. But the truth is, under the existing law, the responsibility for updating the list is that of the chief elections officer. Go to the law for yourself and read sections 5, section 7, section 11. I think there's a little bit on it in section 25 as well. Do that for yourself. Don't take my word for it. Now, it is the political parties have an interest, of course, in reviewing the list and in making suggestions for removal. But it is really the responsibility of the chief elections officer to remove persons from the list because they are paid to do so. But given failures, successive failures to keep the list updated, a re-registration or confirmation, as they call it in the amendments, to my mind would be appropriate. Now, the lawyers have declared that there's no need for amendments to allow such to happen. I'm inclined to agree with them. But who should be removed? Well, the dead we know, according to the law, those absent for Dominic of 5 years. But in their proposed amendments, they also propose to remove those who fail to confirm the requirement. But I want to note at that point, though, that we have to look at that element very carefully because there's a potential in that particular element for disenfranchising our people if there isn't an adequate process for ensuring persons have every opportunity to register. For instance, imagine someone being out of Dominica for 2 years and you cannot reach them at the time. Your process must be solid enough. And given the tendency we know of the current government, well, we know what they do. I could imagine there could be attempts to misuse this to advantage one side. But why is this update so important? Well, we mentioned already the Commonwealth and the OAS, their views. The Commonwealth and the OAS have different takes on this. The Commonwealth didn't particularly think that this was an issue that materially impacted the last general elections. But they noted the fact that it was an issue for the public. The public had difficulties. The OAS was had more of a concern on this matter. But we know that there are many marginal seats, and it just takes a little cheating to turn it around. We know also if the list is cleansed, that many persons who reside overseas for more than 5 years would be removed from that list, and that would make a big difference. So this is important. Updating the list is very important. But just to close, I have a few other things to say, but just to close, I just want to note a few arguments that I heard in the last public panel discussion last week. But one of it, and let me just do this last one, there's another one I would have liked to do, but let me just do this last one, was that when the Attorney General said that successive general elections have been held under the same legislation, almost to imply that why are we having a problem with wanting to change the things now. But I would say to that, yes indeed, but it produced credible results when the incumbent administration did not seek to break laws and tilt the scales in their favor. For sure, we can speak to what happened under the Freedom Party administration. The party never sought to engage in bribery in relation to overseas voters and so on. I will speed that up, but we all know we did the right thing. The party never sought to break the electoral laws in any way. So, but what we have now is the total opposite. And that is why there is need to have the voters list cleansed. This is why there is need for ID. Indeed, the laws has not changed. So let's agree with them there. But one thing has changed. The guards have changed. And they are not guards at all. Let me ask you this one question. What do you do when your guards become thieves? So, we as a political party do think we do need a national dialogue. We don't think, as Johnson Boston said, it's rocket science. It's something that could be done easily. We just wonder, why doesn't this current administration want to get it done? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vital, leader of the Dominica Freedom Party. We would like to now call on the Honorable Lennox Linton, leader of the parliamentary opposition and member for the Marigot constituency. So we invite Mr. Linton to speak for 15 minutes. Just before I hand over the mic, I'd just like to inform the people who own PP571, PV481, PT503. You need to check your vehicles at the right now. PP571, PV481, PT503. Mr. Linton.
Thank you very much, Father Karam. Members of the head table, my sisters and brothers, nice to see you. And I'm really happy for this confirmation that we can in fact have a panel discussion on electoral reform in Dominica that doesn't have an army of law enforcement officers with machine guns breathing down the throats of people who simply have an interest in listening to a discussion on electoral reform. I want to thank you very much for coming here this evening. I want to thank the civil society organizations that have put this together. And I want to thank Father Karam for his suggestion at the beginning that we focus on consensus, on respect, and on trust. These are very important. And consensus important because we do have a consensus in Dominica that we need reform of our electoral system. And it is not a new consensus. It didn't emerge overnight. We have had it for a number of years. And elections in Dominica are not conducted by political parties. I had a political party. I stand before you tonight, but our political party participates in elections. We are a group of people, an organization, looking to get into the governance of the country. We're looking for a transfer to us of the power of the people to run their affairs for a period of 5 years, like the other political parties are. And we have a vested interest, therefore, in ensuring that the process is free and fair and serves as the backbone of our parliamentary democracy. It has to be reliable. And for that, the list of persons electing government in Dominica must be accurate. And the persons who step forward to elect government in the election, we must know who they are. If they are John Brown, then they cannot be John Phillip. And the voting with identification, therefore, is an important part of fixing the process so it is free from fraud and fraudulent manipulation. And the accuracy of the list is paramount. So when the rules say that if the voter, the registered voter is dead, then that name is supposed to be removed from the list, then it must be removed from the list. Because what will happen over time if it stays there, and we've seen it happening, ghosts will vote. Dead people will rise from the dead and come and vote because you have no ID. You don't know who is before you. Somebody comes to vote in the name of the dead man or the dead man, what do you say? And we've seen that happening in Dominica. So, the point I wanted to make regarding consensus is that we do have a consensus in Dominica that reform is necessary in the interest of ongoing, continuous improvement of the process. And to hear people talking in 2019 that what we had in 1978 is what we still have now and it has served us well and it is delivering incredible results, when all around the world people are continuously improving what they have to ensure that it is suiting the times and it is delivering the results that the people want, fair and accurate. So, on the question of respect, the Constitution of the Commonwealth of Dominica, or Supreme Law, is what empowers the Electoral Commission as the independent body responsible for the conduct of free and fair elections. That didn't come from a political party. It came from the Constitution Order of 1978, our Supreme Law. And so the Electoral Commission has a constitutional mandate to ensure free and fair elections in Dominica. And the Constitution says, at Section 56, that in the exercise of its functions under the Constitution, the Commission shall not be subject to the direction or control of any other person or authority. And that is clear enough. What is the problem before us? Why can't we have the reforms on which there has been consensus now for over a decade? I asked you the question, but I'm not going to ask you to answer. I'm going to answer the question. We don't have these reforms because the Electoral Commission of the Commonwealth of Dominica has decided that in its functions under the Constitution of the Commonwealth of Dominica, it will subject itself to the direction and the control of Roosevelt, Skerritt and company. I didn't say the Labour Party, they're not here tonight. And I suspect they're not here because they are suggesting to Dominicans that they're no longer a political party. Political parties have conventions and they vote freely and fairly, hopefully, for persons to serve in positions of authority of the party. This group has had no convention, annual convention, for over 6 years, and therefore no longer qualifies as a political party. I am therefore not surprised that they're not here tonight. But the point about the independence, I want you to consider this very carefully. It was back in 2008, under the chairmanship of Gerald Burton, that the Independent Electoral Commission arrived at a decision to clean the voters list and issue ID cards for voting. Twofold reform agenda back in 2008. 11 years later, it has not happened. We had one election in 2009, no reform. We had one in 2014, no reform. And last week, at the panel discussion, the chairman of the Electoral Commission basically came to the panel discussion to say that the people of Dominica do not expect to see any reform. for the 2019 or 2020 election because there is no time to perfect the ID card system. Ladies and gentlemen, my sisters and brothers, this is absolutely unacceptable. It is unacceptable because the chairman told us, the people of Dominica, that a verification exercise that was planned to begin in July of 2018 was halted because the government indicated that they were going to go to Parliament with legislation, with amendments to legislation to facilitate certain things to happen so that you could have ID cards for voting and you could have a re-registration or confirmation of voters on the register. That is the ruling party. So you, the independent body under the Constitution responsible for free and fair elections, you have made a decision. You decide to set aside your decision in favor of the ruling party's initiative for legislative amendments, which we are being told by the legal experts in Dominica we do not need for the purpose of cleaning the list and issuing ID cards. But you set it aside. Before you did that, you knew very well that the legislation allowed you to do the verification of voters on the list. Why? Because you prepared an SRNO. You prepared statutory rules and orders relating to section, your authority, the authority granted to you, the Commission, under section 25(1)(e) of the Registration of Electors Act. What does that say? It says that the Commission may make regulations with respect to any matters incidental to the provisions of this Act relating to the registration of electors. The question of the list is a registration of electors matter. And the law says the Commission can make regulations for that purpose. So regulations were drafted to facilitate the verification exercise. These regulations, let me quote for you, can be cited at Registration of Electors, Verification of Register of Electors, Regulations of 2018. Verification exercise. The Chief Registering Officer may from time to time conduct a verification exercise to determine the names of persons which should be deleted from the register because those persons have died or have been away from Dominica for a period exceeding 5 years. The verification exercise shall be undertaken by enumerators visiting the homes of electors in the polling districts to which they are assigned and making such inquiries in the community as are appropriate in order to determine if each elector is alive and in Dominica. In the conduct of the verification exercise, the enumerator shall utilize the information sheet in Appendix 1. At the end of a verification exercise, or at such intervals during a verification exercise as the Chief Registering Officer decides, he shall publish a notice containing the following. A list of the names and the addresses as they appear in the register of persons who have not been located in Dominica. B, a list of persons who have been reported or are suspected to have died. The notice shall request information by or on behalf of each person named in either list, why his name should not be deleted from the register, and request that the information to which paragraph A refers be submitted to the Chief Registering Officer by the date specified in the notice. The date specified in the notice to which the Regulation 3.2 refers shall not be less than 30 days from the date of publication of the first notice. The notice to which Regulation 3.1 refers shall be published once in the official Gazette and twice at intervals of not less than 7 days apart in at least one weekly newspaper circulating in Dominica. Now listen to this. When the date for the submission of the information requested pursuant to Regulation 3.2 has expired, the Chief Registering Officer may, in the absence of information justifying the retention of any names in the notice, delete the names from the register. When the Chief Registering Officer deletes from the register the names of persons pursuant to 4.1, he shall forthwith publish the deletion of names in the official gazette and in a local weekly newspaper circulating in Dominica, and once thereafter within 10 days of the first publication of names. That's exactly what happens in other countries. Barbados did it just before the election of 2018. You take action to remove names from the list that are not supposed to be on the list. And here we have the commission empowering in itself with regulations that it is authorized to make under the existing laws, so that that particular matter of cleaning the list through a process of verification can take place. They had this since last year. They have set it aside. The government complains that as a result of not being able to put through the legislation through Parliament, we cannot have reform. We didn't ask the government any question about legitimizing bribery and treating. The people are not interested in legitimizing bribery and treating, but that was part of the amendments that we were bringing to the Parliament. The people have asked the government no question about registering or placing people or confirming people on the register at overseas locations. The people expect that this is an election in Dominica, this is an electoral process in Dominica, and those of us who have gone overseas and wish to maintain our names on the register can do so when we visit the country of our birth. But it shouldn't be the response. 2 minutes. Thank you, Father. It shouldn't be the responsibility of the Electoral Commission or any other body in Dominica to go chasing nationals who have disqualified themselves by being absent from the country for more than 5 years in different corners of the world where they are in order to put them back on the register. They have the responsibility to register. They have the responsibility to vote. They have the responsibility to keep themselves on the register if, according to law, they have allowed their names to be removed from the register. It is as simple as that, and there is no, the question of disenfranchisement does not arise. So where are we? We are here now, being told by the chairman of the Electoral Commission that we will not have reform, basic reforms, meaning cleaning the list and issuing ID cards for voting in time for the next election. So he has said what is in his head and what is his intention, which confirms that he is acting on behalf of the Dominica Labour Party that does not want electoral reform and has done its best to frustrate it. The next question is for the people. Do you accept that? Because it is our electoral process, not the process of a few individuals to decide what they're going to do with it over a period of a decade or more. It is time for Dominicans to reclaim their country and to insist that what is right for the development of institutions in Dominica will protect our livelihood, that will protect our freedom and democracy, that they will stand firm and ensure that those happen. If we can't do that, we'll keep talking, and we'll keep talking, and we will keep talking.
So thank you to the Honorable Lennox Linton, Leader of the Parliamentary Opposition, for sharing his thoughts with us. We just want to invite Mr. LeBlanc to just give us a synopsis, a brief summary of some of the things that we have been looking at.
Okay, I'm just going to go through the question. Is there parliamentary is a parliamentary amendment required to enable ID cards to be a suitable method to prevent persons from voting more than once. The registration of electors, chapter 203, clause 19 says the chief registering officer may cause identification card containing prescribed information to be issued in accordance with the regulations, or may employ other suitable methods for preventing electors from voting more than once in the same election. So it says cause ID cards containing prescribed information in accordance with regulation, or may employ other suitable methods preventing electors from voting more than once. Move on. So ID cards is suggested. Why? Is it a suitable method? And most people agree it's yes. Go ahead. Let's go back. The chief registering officer, the chief registering officer may employ other suitable methods of preventing electors from voting more than once in the same elections. What are other suitable methods that have been employed? Go ahead. One suitable method that has been used is indelible ink, and it's been used since 1985, and it has been used or attempted to be used until recently to prevent persons from voting more than once at the same elections. Move on. So, has there been a parliamentary amendment to electoral laws to allow indelible ink to be used as a method? Move on. Indelible ink has been employed as that method since 1985. Are there issues with the use of indelible ink method now? The answer is yes. You put your finger in any mineral substance like oils, coconut oils or whatever, you put your finger in indelible ink and you wipe it out right away. You have not voted. So we need to find another method. ID card containing prescribed information issued in accordance with the regulation is a suitable method in preventing electors from voting more than once in the same election. Why does the Electoral Commission say to us that a parliamentary amendment is required to electoral laws in order to enable the use of ID cards, but it was not required for indelible ink? That's it. Now we're open to questions.
So I want to thank the panel for sharing with us their thoughts on electoral reform, the use of ID cards, and for generating a more accurate list, voters list. We will take questions from the floor, so what I invite you to do is to please stand up and make a line coming towards the microphone so that we know who is first, who is second, who is third. Please introduce yourself, your name, and then please direct your question through me to one of the panelists at the head table. So please remember that you have 1 minute to ask your question and the panelists have 3 minutes to respond. So please just stand up and come to the mic that is at the center of the floor and ask your question. Just take the mic from the stand, yes. Is it on?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, members of the head table, ladies and gentlemen, electoral reform that we've been hearing about for a long while now. What happens, or where do we go from here, if there is no electoral reform? And I didn't say, where do you all go? I said, where do we go? Or what happens if there is no electoral reform? Because it looks like it's the steepest mountain in the world to climb.
Thank you very much for your question. That question can be answered by any one of the members of the panel. What would be the next moves or the next steps in order to ensure that some kind of reform is enacted before the next general elections?
Let me be clear. The next general election in Dominica is constitutionally due in May of 2020. There is enough time for the Independent Electoral Commission under the Constitution of the Commonwealth of Dominica to do what needs to be done, to do what it started to do in 2018 and stopped. There's enough time for the verification, and there's enough time for issuing of ID cards. The ID card machine and equipment is sitting at the Electoral Commission now for over a year. So it's there. There's enough time. And please, while there's enough time, please don't ask me, the leader of a political party in opposition, what the next steps are going to be. Or you're looking for incitement? I'm not going down that road.
Thank you very much.
Whatever happens, I'll tell you one thing that is absolutely necessary. Go to the polls in your largest numbers and deal an overwhelming defeat to the Labour Party under Roosevelt Skerrit. That is necessary. But we have to monitor what's going on. If they fail to do what is right, we've got to go to the next stage if they do call the elections and monitor whether or not they cheat, they bribe, and any other thing that is not right. Because I'll tell you one thing, it's a right of any people to defend themselves and their democracy.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Thank you. Good evening to everyone. My name is Michael Cooper. Electoral reform is in the interest of the people of Dominica. And I want to ask of the persons on the head table, on the commission who are selling passports, what do you think about that? Thank you.
All right, so we're not talking about passports tonight, okay? We're talking about ID cards and we're talking about an accurate list of registered voters list, okay? So, next question, please.
Yes, good evening. My name is Oliver Walsh, members of the head table, and everybody inside. I have one question. I have been a driver, a vehicle driver, for a number of years, ever since I was 18 years. In fact, I got licensed at 16 years. And I used to pay my license for a book, a license book. But after a period, the license book was no longer required because of, I think, faults that was in people representing other people. Why is it that this card is my driver's license, and it's difficult for me to have a voter's card to go to the booth and identify myself as the individual? Thank you.
So the question is directed to any member of the panel.
The licensing process was reformed. Yeah, we went through licensing reform, no? Okay. So we are capable of reform in Dominica. We're pretending when it comes to electoral reform, we have a problem. But we do reforms in Dominica, and the licensing reform is one of them. So as a result of the licensing reform, we moved from a book to an ID card, all right? But very interesting, very interesting. If you stop paying that license, you don't stop being able to drive. So you're not disenfranchised from driving. But if you stop paying the license, you lose your qualification to be on the road. And you can get back that qualification by paying the license again, right? But the franchise remains. All right. Just want to make that point.
Anybody else would like to?
Maybe the group can answer this better than I can, but I would want to think that a driver's license is not necessarily a foolproof identification card. And that is maybe why they want to use biometrics and a couple other stuff to ensure. I am not sure, but maybe the others can give a thing. But what is for sure is that the electoral, the regulations can be made so that any identification that they so desire to be used can be used. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Let's have the next question, please.
Next one. I am part of this. Hold it up. Okay. I am told, and I am part of this reform. I am advised that ID cards can be issued with the present laws that we have. I'm also hearing that it may not be so. I would like to be guided, because it appears to me that if the lawyers from the different positions are holding different views, they can come together to have the common view so that we could process easier, faster, and more satisfactory to everybody. What is the difference and what the hold-up in terms of the issuance of these ID cards? Probably Mr. Charles could lead us in that, followed by Mr. Charles.
Mr. Charles.
Yeah. I can only hazard a guess, because part of the difficulty is getting information. Why is it that some persons are interpreting this section 19 differently? And the guess I can hazard is the term national ID card. Where is the origin of that term? There are two origins, and I'm trying to find out which one is first. There's an origin that comes through our greater integration under the revised Treaty of Bastille that provides for 4 movements or 4 freedoms. And one of the freedoms is the freedom of movement of persons. So a national ID card can be used as a travel document. And I will explain a little bit more on that. The other one is the source of the legislation that informed in part the drafting of the amendment bill, that is the Registration of Electors Amendment Bill 2018. It came from St. Kitts, where they used the term. If the term actually originated as a result of the implementation of the revised Treaty of Bastille, where you're going to use travel document, we don't have to go further and go to Europe, where our revised Treaty of Bastille is patterned or influenced or informed strongly by the freedoms you have in the European communities, where they realized that a number of ID cards were issued, but they lack security features. And it was decided that part of the security features would be to put biometric data on it. Why? We know the benefits that persons who are members of the European Union enjoy with their ID cards. We're also aware of international criminal organizations and how they can duplicate and how they can forge documents to allow for the trafficking in persons. So if you're trafficking in persons and the returns are substantial there, you will find if you can forge documents and you can provide those persons whom you're trafficking in the kind of returns that you're going to get. So within the European Union, it was very important to have these things there. However, with the voter ID card, it is not a travel document. So I'm concerned why all this issue and argument about it. I just want to tell you that the different interpretation you can get, it depends on the source of the information and the use to which you want to put the document. I thank you.
I would want to just add, it's simple as this, you know, we don't have to do the heavy maths. A national ID card, any Dominican can have a national ID card. It means that Dominicans will be all over the world. They can have a national ID card, all right? And then you have people now, as it relates to jurisdiction, you will now have a voter's ID card for your jurisdiction, which is different. Because you would be able then to be able to say, well, I have my voter's ID card and therefore I can vote. So it's separate and apart from what Mr. Charles have touched on. The issue is we need to have the ID cards for voting because we're dealing with an election. It is specifically to election, and therefore, why go get a different card when you're dealing with a specific issue? So voters card for voters, national for national. All right, thank you.
Yes, next question, please. Please indicate, as I said, your name and who you would like to direct your question towards.
My name is Gilbert Richards, and any one of the panelists can answer my question. However, I am informed that I can only ask questions. But I would seek your permission to preface my question with a statement.
Once it doesn't go over the minute limit.
Well, what I am about to say, probably it will take more than a minute to digest it after I have said it. Because I think, with all due respect, all along I'm hearing arguments and discussions in relation to identification cards, which I think are absolutely necessary.
Please proceed.
Everybody seemed to be missing Regulation 15 of the Registration of Electors Act. Please read Regulation 15, I would urge everybody here, and tell me then if you don't see a duty, any one of you on the panel, if you don't see a duty in the chief elections officer to cause identification cards to be made. That regulation, I must say, is made pursuant to Section 19 of the Registration of Electors Act, which means that regulation must be for the purpose of issuing voter ID cards, because that is what Section 19 of the Act permits. I just have this difficulty understanding why Regulation 15
Proceed.
Do you think Regulation 15 of the Registration of Electors Act imposes a duty on the Chief Elections Officer to cause identification cards to be made, to be issued in accordance with Section 19 of the Registration of Electors Act?
Yes. I think we had an answer. Yes, yes. That's the answer coming from the panel. At least 2 members indicated yes. 3? Okay. All right, yes.
Yes. Good night. I am Glenroy Soso Coffee, the candidate for the United Workers' Party in the Windsor Central constituency. As we speak, there is evidence that there are dead names on the list. I'm saying, I've heard politicians say, especially the government side, that politicians are responsible for going through the list and submitting dead names. When you have done that,
whose responsibility it is, because even if you brought a dead name forward, isn't there the registry to verify that this person is in fact dead? So when these names are submitted, whose responsibility it is to have these names removed? Because it appears that the work is being done. We do that work, identify the names that are dead by family members stating, yes, in fact, they are dead. But you need to verify that these names are in fact dead. And who is responsible? Whose responsibility? Because we have submitted names to the Electoral Office, and we have not yet seen any of these names removed. So can somebody help us tonight? Whose responsibility it is to remove the dead names from the list? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Susu. Mr. Susu, when we look at section 17, and it says the particulars of death on the Registration of Electors Act, Registration of Electors Regulations, it says the Registrar General of Birth and Death, as well as each Registrar of Birth and Death, shall not later than the 15th of September in each year transmit to the Chief Electoral Officer a list of persons 18 years of age or over whose deaths have occurred during the preceding months within the registration area or part of the registration area within the district to which he has been appointed. So it's obvious that, of course, and it's the same when we had the introduction from Mr. Charles. He made it clear that the laws are there for the registrar to be able to provide that list to the commission. And once that list is being provided to them, they are and they have the obligation to do what they have to do in order to cleanse at least to remove the dead people on the list. Because when the framers of this law, which was for some time now, was thinking about the laws of the Commonwealth of Dominica and the whole issue about voting, they took that into consideration, because why give a power to a local authority and that you will not be able to, for example, to remove dead people on the list that you can confirm that are dead? It is not practical. So section 17 take care of that in our own laws, put it this way, separate and apart from the new draft proposals that have been proposed by the commission. All right.
Thank you very much. Please, next question, please.
Thank you. In the interest of not making mistakes, I'm just going to read here. The cleansing process proposed for July 1st last year and the accompanying regulations mentioned by Mr. Linton indicate that there are persons within the electoral office intending to act within the law. That's by my view. However, Wednesday's fiasco clearly indicated to us, as mentioned again by Mr. Linton, that the Commission halted its mandate in order to facilitate passing of proposed legislation by the incumbent. Section 7 of the Act states that one's name should be removed from the list only under 4 conditions. Number 3 being, quote, he has been absent from the country for a period exceeding 5 years, end quote. This legislation suggests that once this occurs, the name qualifies for removal. Is it not true that our electoral office is tasked with this responsibility in law? And if so, should they not seek to install the relevant equipment in order to have that happen? And I'll address that question to the legislators present. Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Charles? Oh. Let us see them.
Okay. When we talking about subject, there is a framework within which this is addressed. In fact, the commission has what I would want to describe quasi-judicial function, where you give persons hearing. Because removing somebody's name, a person who is alive, removing the name of a living elector from the register is an adverse administrative action. And there's a body of laws that guide us as to how we deal with this kind of decisions. It is not because you have the authority and the power to do it that you do not do it in a manner that is fair and just. I guess most of us have a what you call a Christian background. And most of us, I believe, read the Bible. And we talk about natural justice. It is exemplified in the behavior of God towards Adam when Adam did what he did. God had a lot of power, and he has a lot of power. Yet he took time and he said, Adam, come to me. I have a few questions to ask you about what you did. You have to explain to me why you did what you did. He gave Adam the opportunity to explain himself. That's exactly the framework we have. Similar aspect of natural justice. The commission has to get in contact with you and give you the opportunity to give reasons why your name should not be removed or why the objection ought not to be followed. And they give guidelines how you do it. You also have, because it's adverse, you also have a right to appeal based on this. So we have a framework where we ensure that, notwithstanding the circumstances, we adhere to the rule of natural justice. And that is clearly established in all the cases that we have been dealing with election situations, even Dominica and St. Kitts, St. Vincent, etc., and other countries.
Thank you very much. We'll take the next question, please. Just 1 minute. Just come and stand up at the back of the line again so you can clarify. But let's take the following question, the next one. Please go ahead.
My question is that why election reform and why the list should be clean? Sorry about, my name is Franklin Germain.
That's
no. So why the list should be clean and why should be election reform and voter ID card?
Right.
For instance, there is two Franklin Germain. Now to differentiate which is number one and number two, we should know, we should have the ID card. Number two, my name is appearing in two different polling stations in Dominica. Okay, so that should be clean. Because if I am unfair, I can go to that polling station in that constituency and come back and vote in the next one. No. My stepfather, I can call his name because he's a dead man. Okay, and also my brother. My stepfather is James Edward, and my brother is Mervyn Edward, and they used to live in 18 Watties Lane, Goodwill, Rosenhoff, and their name is still on the list. So this is why I argue for election reform and to clean the list. And I hope Mr. Burton is hearing that. Okay, so I don't need to come to him. Okay, my name is Franklin Germain, and my name appear on two different polling stations in Dominica, and my brother or my brother-in-law and my brother, their name is on the list. They live at 18 Watties Lane, James Edward and Mervyn Edward. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your comment. Next person, please.
Good evening. My name is McDonald Thomas.
Can we have a little bit of silence, please?
In reading the news last week, I noticed that the Guyana Independent Elections Commission, based on the consensus in Guyana that there should be a revised elections register, informed the government that elections should not be held before November of this year in order to give it time to undertake this exercise. This, to me, is in contrast to what I heard Mr. Burton said last week. As an independent elections commission, do you think it is the elections commission that should tell the government how much time it needs to have this exercise done, and that elections should not be held any time before they are allowed to have that exercise undertaken as is done in Guyana?
With the greatest of respect, Mr. Burton has emerged as someone who has absolutely no respect for his constitutional responsibilities. And this question I have posed to him in a public forum that he had in Marigot some time ago. And as far as he's concerned, the Prime Minister's constitutional responsibility to call election supersedes the Commission's responsibility for free and fair election, to be ready for free and fair elections. So whatever happens, once the Prime Minister calls the elections, the Commission under his chairmanship is prepared to go along and facilitate it, whether they are ready to deliver free and fair elections or not. And I consider that to be a total and absolute disrespect of constitutional responsibility for the conduct of free and fair elections in Dominica.
Yes. In fact, the Guyana's Parliament have just approved the monies required by the Commission to do their work. Just approved that.
I'd just like to ask the panelists to be careful how they use the names of our officials. Please, next question.
Michael Astafan. I'm here wearing several hats. But anyway, I want to speak to the reform necessary for you to have a chairman who cannot be influenced from either conflicts of interest, where he has contractual arrangements with the government, okay? Because I know we're not here to sell passports, but obligation to ensure that the chairman, when you have an electoral commission made up of 2 from one party, 2 from the other party, and 1 supposed to be independent, that we have, because the mess we have now in our electoral reform has to do with the individual, okay? Because he has said in public that he only got 1 recommendation, legal recommendation for electoral reform. We made several, I know the UWP made several, and we made a joint. So we have an individual who is not acting in the best interest of democracy. So we as a people must recognize where the problem is. The problem is with the individual selected. We must have people who have arm's length dealing with political parties. And we must have people who are not in contractual arrangements with the government. I think that is where our problem stems. Because if you understand, the gentleman told us at his office, and it was all 3 parties were there, that he was so impressed with the legislation submitted by the government side that he dispatched the chief election officer next day to the Attorney General to prepare it for Parliament. And that legislation had making bribery and treating legal. Okay? How can a lawyer who went to law school propose something that on the statutes are criminal to make it legal? I have difficulties. I think the problem has to deal with the individual who appoint as chairman.
I don't think there was really a question in there, was there? Last question, and then it's already 9:10, so we'll close up after this.
Yeah, just for clarification, as we can see up on the screen, the law says that one can be shall remain registered unless and until his name is deleted from the register because C, he has been absent from Dominica for a period exceeding 5 years. I think that that is totally and absolutely clear that once the person exceeds 5 years being absent from the country, that their name should be removed. My understanding of the law, with my little brain, is that the Chief Elections Officer, if he is satisfied in his own deliberate judgment that a name should be removed from the list, that he is under law authorized to do so. Now, I agree totally with Mr. Charles that it should not happen without the involvement of the person whose name is being removed. That person should be, the process should be followed in, under law, as is presently part of our law, for that person to be given that opportunity to represent themselves. But what I'm saying is, seeing that this is a law and the commission and the office is under law, given the responsibility to remove those names, should they not be moving to ensure that all the necessary apparatus, including that which informs them of the absence of the person for more than 5 years, through interaction with the immigration department, that is present in order for them to do their work? That's my point.
Thank you very much. All right, just the last two and we'll round up. Try to keep your questions or comments under 1 minute. And remember please be careful how we use people's names. Go ahead, please proceed.
Yes, good evening to the panel. My name is Huron Vidal. Dominica, residing and have my business in Dominica for the past 15 years. I realize, and I've heard the chairman of the commission, the chairman of the Electoral Commission, stated in no uncertain terms that he has no intentions of allowing electoral reform to take place before elections. Now, I am a little bit concerned because there could be a lot of things happening between now and the 20th of June, 19th of May next year, 2020. There could be some catastrophe. Yes, there could be catastrophes. There could be hurricane. There could be earthquake. There could be civil unrest and anything to prevent that election from taking place on that date, which is in May of 2020. Let's suppose that happens. What happens? Would we have another election? Or would we have, what was going to happen? I expect the luminaries to explain to us what would happen in the event that for whatever reason, we have to go past the 20th, the May deadline for elections. Thank you very much.
All right. Yes.
Well, I think it's a simple answer. If there is any disaster that is unable, that come on to us, then it's obvious that the necessary adjustments would have to be made for that, because those disasters, you have no control over that. So I guess when everything is back up and running, another date can be set by the Electoral Commission to do so.
Okay, no, I had said that this was the last one, so I'm very, very sorry. This is the last question or comment. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. My name is Al Monel. Based on last week's panel discussion, the ruling party, through their representatives, they acknowledged that having ID cards was best practice. The law as it is also provides for the removing of dead persons from the list. So I'm saying, based on these two basic issues where both sides agree, as in the case of Venezuela, we see the Pope being asked to mediate. I would ask whether the panel and the organizers would maybe approach the office of the bishop to have some mediation, have some dialogue with the commission in an effort to prevent any sort of bloodshed in the streets of Dominica. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comment. So this brings an end to the two sections, the panel discussion and the questions from the floor. I want to thank everybody for making their contributions. There's a vote of thanks prepared. So just please remember that as we continue the discussion, the three words that I mentioned, the respect, the consensus, and the trust. We should try to avoid especially making sweeping and generalized and polarizing statements, but try to inform ourselves of exactly what people have said so that we can make a proper response. Remember that. Trust, consensus, and respect. Mr. Anthony will give the vote of thanks.
Good evening. I first want to thank the audience for being here. Without you, we would not have a discussion. Your questions were generally good and lively. And I want to thank the panelists for coming, the Dominica Freedom Party and the United Workers' Party. I would want to thank the media houses for having attended. DBS and the Q should have been carrying it live. I see GIS is present. And the Consensus Movement and the Manufacturers Association and one other website has it live. I would want to thank the other members of the Electoral Reform Effort Group for their support and their guidance. I want to thank Father Karam for moderating. I want to thank Ms. Sandy for keeping time. And last but by no means least, I want to thank the Almighty God for being with us tonight. And I would like to assure you that the group has no intention of taking it political. Our intention is about Dominica, preserving our democracy and making sure our democracy works. I thank you for your support. I want to thank the sound system for being here.